Hi, Aunt Fran, here to bring you part B of the Robert Virgin story, our immigrant from England, who travels from England to Jamestown in the year 1637. And there is a bunch of mystery around his time there because, number one, he has a son that is, we don't know his name. He's a missing link. And you have the DNA of Native American in you, which means that he could have married a Indian. So we're going to keep exploring the possibilities of this story. All right, we left off talking about the Indians that were in close proximity to the Jamestown colonists. And we had about 20 years of peaceful rule with the father of Pocahontas, followed by the 25 years of tyrannical killing by Opechancanough. That ends with his assassination by unnamed colonists in 1644. And then we pick up with his son, not his son, another royal offspring, Totopotomia. This would be the son of the first chief, which would make him somehow related to Pocahontas. Okay, and then we've got Chief Totopotomia. He rules for 11 years and is killed peacefully with the colonists, very cooperatively and collaboratively with the colonists. And then while he's fighting the battle at Bloody Run with the colonists, Colonel Hill and Captain John West, he's killed. And that allows his wife, Pocahowski, because she's the first wife, she becomes chief and she rules for 30 years. Okay, during the time of her rule, after the death of her husband, Totopotomia, she has a child with Colonel John West, and they name the child Captain John West, which is customary to name a male child after the father in these Indian type marriages. And that then we have another 20 years of peaceful coexistence and cooperation with the colonists until we get to Bacon's uprising. Sorry, I apologize. I called it Beacon's uprising, but it's not Beacon, it's Bacon's uprising. So now I'm going to dive into a little bit about what Bacon's uprising is. So the colonists that were located, so let me orient you to this very old map here. These counties don't exist in this format now, but back in the 1600s, this is where the counties were. This little island right here is where Jamestown is, and across the river here is the Surrey County, and you can see Bacon's plantation was right here, just across the river from Jamestown. So that's where Bacon was living at the time. This is a picture of him, and this is a picture of his uprising. So Bacon, why did he uprise? Well, he had a lot of indentured servants. He was a really wealthy guy from England. He had a lot of indentured servants, and one of the deals with indentured servants was if they worked for free for 5 to 7 years, they were granted between 50 and 100 acres by the colony. And at this time of the uprising, they were running out of prime land to give away to these indentured servants, because primarily the workforce of that day was indentured servants of England because they were just so plentiful. There was just a handful of Black slaves that helped. most of the workers were these indentured servants. And so there was a buildup of these indentured servants who wanted their land. And so with the help of Bacon, he organizes an uprising, and he goes to Berkeley and says, hey, we want land for these indentured servants, and we want not just any land far away. We want the prime land that belongs to Kokakowski and the Powhatan tribe, because it's very convenient along the river. It's good for growing tobacco. We want that land. Give us that land. Berkeley, being the very pro-Indian governor of Virginia that he was, said, no, you can't have that land. And this caused this revolt with this group of men. And you could see this picture. You can see that they actually were able to recruit some Black rebels as well. And the reason for this is the indentured servants were treated very similarly to these Black slaves. They lived together, they worked together, they did the same job, they were treated similarly. And so the Blacks thought, well, heck, if the whites are going to revolt and get their land, then yeah, I might as well revolt too. Maybe I'll get some land, I'll get some freedom or something. So they were pulled into this revolt along with the white indentured servants. They go against Jamestown and end up burning the place to the ground. Well, word gets back to England about this uprising, and the king is furious. He can't believe that there would be a white uprising, and let alone banded together with the Blacks, who he believes is an inferior race. He says this is, disaster for the future, and he decides he's going to remove Berkeley from the governorship of Virginia because he just can't have these kinds of uprisings. And he doesn't care about the Indians. He's, we'll give away the Indians' land. He doesn't care about that. So then he calls for the removal of Berkeley, and Berkeley is taken back to England. Now, this is devastating. This is about 10 years into Kokakowski, and this is a statue of Kokakowski here, and she is probably just absolutely devastated when Berkeley leaves, because he's her primary ally for 20 years, and even before that for 40 years if you count the time that he was working with her late husband. So Berkeley gets taken back to England, and she is now left without an ally. And the new governor and the colonists sign a new treaty with her, where she basically has to capitulate most of her ancestral lands, give that up in exchange for peace and security with the colonists. But really, it's a meaningless treaty, because after that point, there's basically the laws and rules are changed, how you can treat Indians. And basically now you could just kill Indians if they come onto your land, as long as you have a witness. You don't have to pay retribution or anything like this. This opens up the door to the systematic, extermination of the Powhatan tribe, either killing them or pushing them completely out of the area. So by the end of the century, by about 1698, her tribe was down to just 10 or 12 men. And so it had been completely devastated. At the end of her life, it is rumored, not proved, but rumored that Colonel John West, the father of her son John West, left his English wife and took up with her for the last years of her life, and she died in 1686. Okay, so now you have an idea of the relationships between the Indians and the colonists during this time. And now I'm going to switch over to the English characters in our story. So Robert Virgin was born in England in 1608. And when he was about 10 years old, there was this phenomenon called Pocahontas who came to England. And here's another depiction of her, but I think this is the most accurate one of her. And this would have caused a huge stir during his childhood. It would have been romanticized quite a bit, talking about the noble savage and about John Rolfe, who had married her. John Rolfe was a farmer. And so he's he's growing up in a farming home. His father is a farmer. He's going to grow up to be a farmer. Maybe he could go to America and marry a noble savage. Maybe these are the kinds of thoughts that were put in his head at a young age of around 10. So we fast forward to 1637, and he gets his break. He gets his opportunity. There is a man by the name of John Moon, who's a ship captain, and he has been awarded, because he's been promoted for probably being a good ship captain, taking people across the Atlantic. He's been awarded 500 acres and 11 free tickets to bring people to Jamestown area in order to start a tobacco farm. He only has 11 slots. He's got to be real strategic on who he picks. He's probably going to pick some expert farmers. And somehow Robert Virgin gets one of those 11 spots. He gets hired by John Moon and taken to Jamestown. And then our missing link would have had to been born in 1642. And really, that's all the clues that we were given. The trail kind of just went cold when it came to Robert Virgin. We didn't have any marriage records, no death records, nothing. Part of this was because of all of the burning and war. A lot of the records in that Virginia colony were destroyed early on. So it's difficult to find records on people from that colony. So I had to turn to the next best thing. I had to turn to all of the people who were associated with John Moon. John Moon himself did background research on him, trying to figure out what was the connection between him and Robert. Then when he landed when did he land in America to start this farm? And who did he know? Who were his neighbors? Who did he marry? All of this stuff. And this research on John Moon led me to a guy named Arthur Smith. And I frequently will read the wills of people in order to try and figure out what was going on in their life. So I was lucky and I found the will of Arthur Smith, written sometime around 1645. We think probably more like around 1643 if you look at the other documents. Anyways, he right here, it says in the first line, I, Arthur Smith of Warsquick, Virginia, this time sick and weak in body. So he must have gotten sick and written this will, because he actually doesn't die for about 20 more years after this. So he must have gotten better, but he was sick enough to write his will. And so I was reading about his, who he was giving things to and who he was married. And here it was, boom. I give and bequeath unto my godson Arthur Virgin, the son of Robert Virgin, one yearling heifer, to be delivered the next crop after my disease, if we shall be then living. So there we go. We have this amazing connection now between the neighbor and friend of John Moon, whose name is Arthur Smith, and in his will we have the name of our missing link, Arthur Virgin. So this brought up all kinds of questions. Now, who is this Arthur Smith guy? Obviously, our missing link was named after him with the name Arthur, because that name Arthur isn't anywhere in the Virgin line at all. So had to have been because of Arthur Smith somehow. What happened? What was going on? So now I have to back in and figure out the life story of Arthur Smith to try and figure out this story around our great-grandfather, Arthur Virgin. So I take a good study at the map to see where everybody's at. And here is Smithfield, named after, actually, the Arthur Smith family. It's a town that exists there today. And the county that they are in is called the Isle of Wight County. And there is quite a long ways walk over to Jamestown, or probably shorter if you took a boat up the river. And then you have the West Plantation over here. And just to give you an idea of where the Indians were, the Powhatan Indians were right around Richmond and going over to the West Plantation and this whole area here, encompassing Richmond and coming down to the Berkeley Farm and the West Farm. So this was their main territory. This is the one in the first treaty where they got all of this territory as part of theirs. So here we are down here, away from the Powhatan tribe in the Smithfield area where the Arthur Smith ends up. But it takes a little bit of time for him to get there. And I'm going to bring up this old map to explain. Arthur Smith arrives here in 1622. He is 22 years old, and he comes into this little area called Elizabeth City. This was similar to Jamestown. It was a fort. It had a place to park the boats, and it was about the same size as Jamestown. So you have Elizabeth City, and he comes in there, and he doesn't have much to his name. He doesn't own property. He comes alone, and it just so happens that he shows up about a month or two after the Great Massacre of 1622, when the violent Opechancanough comes in and kills 25% of all the English colony. And then as they're huddled in a few remaining farmhouses and in forts in tight quarters, the Abigail ship brings in a disease and kills about 50% more of the colony. So it goes down from about 1,200 people in Virginia to just 350 something people in Virginia. It gets just a devastating 2 years between the disease that follows the massacre. So he comes in right after the massacre into Elizabeth City. And there is an orphan there. And this little baby, somehow, some way, Arthur Smith makes him his godson. His name is named after Arthur, like our Arthur Long. So he then raises this child, probably with the help of maybe a widow or another woman, because I'm sure the infant maybe was breastfeeding and needed, a mother's care, couldn't have done it alone. So he must have partnered up with a woman. In 1624, he has a child with presumably that woman. We don't know who the mother is. His wife is actually still back in England and hasn't made the trip yet. So he has a child, but he cares for this Arthur Long, who's been named after him. And then in 1637, he gets his big break. He gets 1,500 acres. He must have been a really good worker, earned a lot of money, done a lot of good things, because he went from nothing to being issued 1,500 acres and 20-something tickets from the England to bring more colonists over. So he then gets his land over here in the Isle of Wight County. Just so happens it's right next to John Moon, our captain, who had previously gotten land in that same area. They end up to be neighbors. All right, so then somehow the neighbors are working together, or some way. Robert Virgin dies, and we have another, this is 15 years later, we have another orphaned child. Now, his wife, by that time, Arthur Smith's wife, had been brought over. They had 4 kids together, but she died. So here we have another orphan child that Arthur Smith goes ahead and takes care of. Shortly after that, a third orphan child from another neighbor shows up, and in Arthur Smith's will, you have 3 Arthurs that are all godsons: Arthur Long, Arthur Virgin, and Arthur Taylor, who are all godsons to this Arthur Smith. Well, this must be an incredibly, unique situation because I searched 20 years of wills and I only found two other cases where godsons were listed in wills, and it was just one in one will and one in another. This is by far an outlier where you had three godsons all named Arthur for the patriarch, and they're all in the will. So he must have been like some type of real caring person. He obviously married a real caring wife because her life's work was to try and build schools for free schooling to the colonists and Indian children. So, and then Arthur Smith too, the son of Arthur Smith, also marries a gal named Sarah, whose also life work is to build schools and teach kids how to read and write. So there must have been some type of ethic in this family that led to him being the godson of these orphans. All right, so the last piece of the puzzle I needed to solve was, where did this Indian woman come from that Robert could have married? And my answer came when I was studying the history of the county where they were living, Isle of Wight. And what I discovered was that there was a tribe of Indians. They were called the Warasquoki or Warasquaki or Warasquioke. I'm not quite sure how you pronounce that. Warasquioke Indians. And they have quite a long history with the colonists. It turns out that this is the tribe. Remember, the Powhatan tribes was actually a confederacy of tribes. So many tribes acting as one, with one paramount chief. Well, the Warasquioke tribe was the tribe of the mother of Pocahontas. This is where Pocahontas was born or born from, because her mother was from this particular tribe. And their home base was right here. In fact, right exactly where Smithfield is now is the center of that tribe's home, ancestral home. And this tribe was known for its high intelligence and its gentle nature and peaceful nature. It was a very small tribe. And there are situations like when John Smith came originally in 1603, he spent his first night with this tribe, this particular Warasquioke tribe, and he was taken to the chief Powhatan, escorted by this tribe. There was a situation where there was a guy named a teenager, named Thomas Savage, who switched places with an Indian, and they switched places so that they could learn the other tribe's ways. They could learn the language. The first interpreter went to this tribe and was taught how to speak the local languages so that he could communicate. So we have all this history with this Warasquioke tribe, and it's nothing but positive, constructive type of interactions until you get to the massacre of 1622, when the Warasquaki tribe was blamed for a mass killing at one of the plantations here, which was right on the edge of the border of these two counties, Surrey County and Isle of Wight County. And there was just a massive killing there. And the Warasquaki people were blamed for that, even though it may not have been them. It might have been warriors that were sent down from the Powhatan tribe. But they were chased out after that 1622 massacre, chased away. And I'm sure many of them killed. Their huts and houses and village was burned to the ground. Their corn was taken. But a few years later, a small number of those of that tribe returned to their homeland and were basically absorbed by the colonists that were living right there, right just so happens where Smithfield is and the Arthur Smith plantation was. So they came back and they must have been absorbed by the colonists. Because there's very little written about that tribe after that, those years kind of just disappeared. And so here is the potential mother of Arthur Virgin, a Wurlsquoki tribeswoman who came back after the massacre and wanted to come back to her ancestral home, and then was just absorbed by the colonists. They got jobs with the colonists. They worked for them. They were lived right beside them, even though it was during this violent period where the Opichinkanwa chief was actively attacking. I guess he didn't care about just 35 Indians down in Wurlsquoki, or so, so I'm not sure why that he let that happen, but they didn't have telephones and internet, so maybe he didn't know exactly what was going on down there at that location. Anyways, that is the story of our ancestor, Robert Virgin, and his son, Arthur Virgin, and the potential marriage between Robert and an Indian woman. So now we know where she could have come from and how this mystery might have unfolded. Talk to you later.